package just arrived in the mail. It's a Novation Bass Station II. Of course, this is a special version. Normally, they look like this, but this limited edition version has been redesigned by Ian Swift, aka Swifty, and we'll be talking about his work in a little bit. Anyway, I first came across this synth in May at Superbooth, and I was blown away. I'd never touched a Bass Station II before, and I immediately asked Novation if they'd be interested in my making a video about it, which they were. Now, as it happens, I'd been meaning to make a video about the original Bass Station, the one from the 90s, for ages, at least 2 years now. It's a really important synth, has a very long legacy that spans through many different genres of electronic music, so that's the plan for this video. We're going to talk both about the old one, as well as hopefully get to know this beautiful new version of the Bass Station II together. Probably the best way for me to get a feel for this synth is to just jump in and start making music. Oh, that's cool. I'm just going to cycle through some of the presets until I find something that speaks to me. Okay, well, this thing is called the Bass Station, so maybe let's start with a bass line. Let's record something. I'm just going to hit tap a few times in Ableton so I can figure out the tempo. And then I'm going to drag in a random drum loop to serve as a metronome. Okay, let's record that bass line. So that's a basic idea. I've recorded both the audio and MIDI note data. I'm actually going to throw away the audio right now. And I'm going to edit the MIDI note data so that the timing is right. And then I'm going to re-record the audio with that new, better rhythm. And as I record it, I'm also going to play with the filter cutoff knob, just to give the bass line more character. That's pretty good. I'm going to mess a bit with the rhythm of the drums, and I'm going to add some incidental instrumentation. Okay, so yes, this thing is called the Bass Station, but we shouldn't let that keep us from seeing what it actually is, which is just a classic analog monosynth. Albeit a pretty full-featured one. But yeah, the starting point is that same basic architecture that was invented by Robert Moog and Herb Deutsch in the 60s. As such, this thing can be used to produce a whole range of different sounds that have nothing to do with bass. The flexibility of the engine also makes it really good for sound design. Anyway, coming back to the beat we were working on before, let's see if we can't find a lead sound. Oh, that's not bad. I want to get that classic 70s glide. I'm just going to mess with the portamento knob until it sounds right. Perfect. Let's record this. Okay, not bad for a proof of concept. So, you may have noticed as I was walking through the presets that a bunch of them had this sort of squelchy, bubbling quality to them. Those presets are there for a reason. So, the original Bass Station was released in 1993, but its initial success can be traced much further back. Actually, all the way back to 1981 with the release of the Roland TB303. I've talked about the 303 a few times on this channel before. If you don't know what it is, basically it's a little box. Technically, it's an analog synth, but it wasn't marketed that way. It was originally meant to generate bass lines for gigging musicians. There it is, and there's famous jazz pianist Oscar Peterson. I never get tired of this photo. Anyway, the 303 was supposed to sound a little bit like a bass guitar, Unfortunately for Roland, it didn't really do very well on the market, in part because it was kind of a nuisance to program. By 1984, it had already been discontinued. A few years later, some enterprising musicians in Chicago, a group called Future, bought one in a second-hand shop, super cheap because nobody wanted it. And after messing around a bit, they discovered that if you just set it to play the same thing over and over again, your hands were freed up, at which point you can twist the four knobs at the top, and they kind of become an instrument unto themselves. The fruits of their experiments were released as a 12-minute long club track called Acid Tracks. I can't play it here without getting a copyright strike, so instead what you're seeing here is a very faithful recreation of the track by the YouTube channel Ducktronic. This track was kind of like the patient zero for an entirely new genre of music. By the way, here's a magazine article from 1989 talking about how everybody wants a 303 so they can sound like this one track. Kind of fascinating. By 1993, this genre, which was called Acid House, had become super popular in the UK and Germany. This is footage from a segment that MTV put together to explain the genre to their audience.
What makes it acid is turning the knobs like this and making it do different formations of the bass line. That's acid music.
Tons of musicians wanted to be able to make these kinds of sounds, and the used prices on Roland's long discontinued TB303 were exorbitant, as they remain to this day. Well, in comes this new company called Novation. Their first product was this obscure MIDI controller in 1992, immediately followed by this, the original Novation Bass Station. By the way, much of both versions of the synthesizer were designed by the late, great Chris Huggett, who created the Wasp and Oscar synthesizers all the way back in the 70s. Anyway, in terms of features, the Bass Station was not that similar to the TB303. In fact, unlike the Bass Station II, the original Bass Station didn't even have a sequencer. But it was intentionally designed to be able to produce sounds that are very similar to the 303. All of which is why, when the Bass Station II was released in 2013, they actually included two filters. One that's got that tried and true acid house sound, and another that's labeled classic that actually I think is much more distinctive. I think it's probably closer to Chris Huggett's other synths from the 70s. Should we see what both bass stations sound like together? Making this kind of music is really addictive. I went in expecting to shoot like 20 seconds for this video, and I ended up jamming for more than 10 minutes. Suffice it to say, I think the two versions of this synth sound just really good together. Plus, having two instruments in the mix means twice as many controls to mess with. Going into this video, I had some familiarity with the old bass station from the 90s, but I'd never used its modern counterpart. So my experience with this instrument is entirely coming from this new Swifty design, which I think is really beautiful. At Superbooth, Novation had set up a big wall on one side of the room, and over the course of the 3 days of the festival, they had the designer, Ian Swift, create a large mural celebrating both the history of the bass station as well as this new design. When it comes to musical instruments, the way something looks is pretty important to me. As with food, we eat with our eyes first, and if an instrument doesn't look nice, I'm just less likely to want to play it. This design feels fresh and optimistic, but in some ways also very retro. It's funny, usually when I say retro in the context of music gear, I mean something that's been designed to evoke the late 70s or the early 80s, but that's not what's happening here. Ian Swift, who did this design, first made a name for himself as the creator of the logo for Mo-Wax Records. Mo-Wax was an extremely important record label in the 90s that specialized in abstract hip-hop. DJ Shadow, Black Alicious, Uncle, all stuff that was in heavy rotation for me in the late 90s. Anyway, a quick walkthrough of Ian Swift's Instagram profile will give you a sense of his design perspectives, which are quite varied. His work on this synth definitely evokes his classic Mo-Wax logo, a logo that's always reminded me of this certain style of old movie poster from the 50s. You know, the ones with the jagged lines and the stylized typefaces. These were all designed by one guy, a famous designer named Saul Bass. And sure enough, in this interview I found, Ian Swift does cite him as an influence, so story checks out. Anyway, it's really novel to see an instrument design that evokes both the 50s and the 90s at the same time. Pretty cool. The design also happens to be very functional. For example, I just learned how to use this instrument in like 15 minutes, just based on the way the different segments of controls were split up. Obviously, it's not my first subtractive synthesizer, so that also helped. Of course, there's still lots of features I have yet to explore. There's a paraphonic mode, which allows you to play 2 notes at the same time, as well as AFX mode, which was designed in conjunction with Aphex Twin. Basically, it allows you to assign different preset to each key. That sounds really cool, so I'm definitely looking forward to trying that out in the coming months. I'd like to thank Novation for making this video possible. By the way, fellow YouTuber Alex Ball is going to be doing a deeper dive on the history of the bass station over on his channel. His videos are always fantastic, so definitely make sure to check that out. By the way, if you're a patron, I've sampled a bunch of my own presets for the Bass Station II and turned them into a sample library. That's up on the Patreon now. Obviously, nothing beats a real live instrument with knobs that are tweakable, but I still think it's a lot of fun, so definitely check that out. Okay, I think that's it. See you soon.